Last Tuesday afternoon, I was rearranging inventory at work when my brother Theodore sent me a text. Family gathering at Red Lobster on Hamilton Street, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't show up late, failure. The failure jab was pure Theodore. He'd been tossing that insult at me since we were kids, back when he aced every class, and I barely scraped by in math. The message carried that sharp tone he used when he wanted to flex his authority, a reminder that he was the one with the fancy degree and city office while I earned $16 an hour with a name tag pinned to my shirt. I almost skipped it. My first urge was to fire back a snarky reply, maybe ask if this was another lecture about my poor life decisions. But something about this summons felt off. Family meetings at restaurants usually meant bad news delivered where I couldn't react loudly. So I clocked out at 6:30, drove my old, rattling Toyota across town, and stepped into Red Lobster at 6:55. The scent hit me first, warm butter, those cheesy biscuits they shove on every table, and that odd seafood restaurant smell, not quite fishy but not quite fresh either. My family was already at a corner booth, the kind with tall backs for privacy. They'd clearly been there a while. Empty biscuit basket, drinks half gone, that settled look of people who have been waiting. Mom, Dad, Theodore, and my sister Sylvia, all four of them lined up on one side of the booth, leaving me the opposite bench to sit alone. It was a calculated move, and they knew it. They'd used this formation before when I was younger, ganging up to scold me about bad grades, sketchy friends, or whatever way I'd fallen short that week. Dad didn't even wait for me to sit before launching in. "We're here to talk about your grandfather's estate," he said, like he was kicking off a corporate meeting. The words didn't register at first because no one had told me Grandpa Harold had passed. That's how I found out, sitting in a Red Lobster booth on a Tuesday night while a server hovered, asking if I wanted to hear about the shrimp deal. My grandfather, the one family member who ever treated me like I was worth something, was gone, and I was learning about it in a chain restaurant. I asked when he died. Dad said 3 weeks ago, quietly in his sleep. They'd held a small funeral. I asked why I wasn't told. Mom chimed in, saying I was always so busy with my own life. They didn't want to trouble me. They knew I had work and all. Her voice had that hollow ring, the one she used when she was lying and didn't care if I noticed. Sylvia added that it was a small ceremony, just close family and a few of Grandpa's old buddies. The way she said close family, leaving me out without saying it outright, was sharp and intentional. Sylvia was always good at that kind of quiet venom. Dad cleared his throat and pressed on like my shock was an annoying delay. "Your grandfather left an estate worth about $400,000. We're dividing it 4 ways, $100,000 each." He motioned around the table, himself, Mom, Theodore, Sylvia. He said it like he was explaining basic math to someone too dense to get it. I sat there, processing. 4 ways? I asked the obvious question. "Don't you mean 5 ways?" Theodore laughed, that smug chuckle he'd had since high school, like he was choking on his own ego. "No," he said, stretching the word like I was a kid. 4, me, Sylvia, Mom, Dad." He listed himself first, as always. Sylvia smirked, the same look she'd get when we were teens, and she'd pulled off something sneaky. "You're not getting anything," she said, casual as if she were noting the weather. I kept my voice steady and asked why. It took everything not to snap, but I wasn't going to let them see me crack. Dad leaned forward, hands flat on the table, like he was delivering a final ruling. "Because honestly, you're 30, earning $16 an hour, living in that rundown apartment on Chester Avenue. You're a letdown, a failure. We've decided to reallocate your share where it'll actually make a difference. Theodore needs funds for his MBA. Sylvia needs a down payment for a house. They've earned it. They've built something. You just blow the money on video games or whatever nonsense you waste your life on." Mom nodded, like this was the most logical thing ever. "Theodore's got such a promising career and Sylvia's worked so hard. You have to see we're thinking about what's best for the family overall." Best for the family, sure. The family that didn't invite me to Grandpa's funeral. Theodore slid a stack of papers across the table, the pages scraping against the wood. "Sign these, you're waiving any claim to Harold's estate. If you don't, we're ready to make your life hell. Dad knows half the landlords in this city. Mom's friend runs your store, we have influence. One call and you're jobless. Maybe homeless too." The threat was blunt, they weren't hiding their plan. They'd clearly coordinated this, chosen the restaurant, probably practiced their lines, brought legal papers to a Red Lobster to force me to give up money I didn't even know existed until minutes ago. Sylvia watched me, eager to see my reaction. Theodore sat back, smug. Mom and Dad stared with that familiar mix of disappointment and impatience they'd mastered over 3 decades. What they didn't know was this. 3 months earlier, I got a call at work from Peter, Grandpa's neighbor of 40 years. Peter said Grandpa had been asking for me in his final weeks, saying he needed to discuss something important. Peter gave me a name and number, Grace Chen attorney office near the courthouse. I called Grace that day. We talked for a long time. She told me Grandpa had revised his will 6 months before he died. She explained his specific instructions, how inheritance laws worked in our state, and how certain family members couldn't just rearrange assets to suit themselves. She also said my family had already contacted her, trying to speed up probate, asking if beneficiaries could be cut for various reasons. Grace didn't like them. She made that clear. She also said I had legal rights backed by Grandpa's explicit wishes. So for 3 months I studied. I read up on estate law, executor duties, probate processes, coercion, fraud, and undue influence. Grace gave me copies of the real will filed with the court, not whatever Theodore was pushing across the table. I had evidence. I had legal ground. I'd spent 3 months preparing for this exact moment. I reached into my coat and pulled out my own stack of papers, thicker and more official-looking than Theodore's. I placed them on the table. "Read these first," I said. The mood shifted instantly. Dad grabbed the documents, his face going from smug to confused to near panic as he scanned the first page. Mom leaned over, squinting at the legal jargon. Theodore snatched the papers from Dad, and I watched his smugness melt away. The documents laid it out clearly. Grandpa's will named all 5 grandchildren as equal beneficiaries. Coercing a beneficiary to waive their claim was legally actionable. I'd hired a lawyer, and any attempt to bypass me in probate would be challenged. There was more, but that was the gist. I stood up. "Keep your Red Lobster papers," I said. "My lawyer will contact your probate attorney. We'll handle this properly." Then I walked out, leaving them with their shrimp and stunned faces. My phone blew up around 11 p.m. First Theodore, then Sylvia, then Mom. Texts saying we needed to talk, it was a misunderstanding, we could sort it out. I didn't reply. By midnight, they were calling. Dad's voicemail said I was being irrational, tearing the family apart over cash. By 2 a.m., all 4 were outside my apartment building. I live on the 3rd floor, windows facing the street. I heard them below, Theodore shouting that I needed to be reasonable, Mom crying that she didn't understand why I was doing this, Dad demanding I come down and talk like a man, Sylvia saying they didn't know. They'd made a mistake, just open the door. I peeked out my window, seeing them under the streetlight. Part of me wanted to storm down and yell about the funeral I wasn't invited to, about learning Grandpa died in a restaurant, about 30 years of being treated like a burden. But I didn't. I'd spent 3 months preparing. I wasn't going to ruin it by losing my cool. I shut the blinds and went to bed. My phone kept buzzing until nearly 4 a.m. Update 1 that night outside my apartment was just the start. I should have known they wouldn't let it go. My family doesn't back down. They push until they get what they want or you break. Wednesday morning, my phone was flooded with notifications. Not just from them, but from aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. All saying the same thing in different words. Stop being selfish, think of the family, do the right thing, and let Theodore and Sylvia have the money since they'd use it wisely. Aunt Carol, Dad's older sister, left a 5-minute voicemail about how disappointed Grandpa would be if he saw me ripping the family apart over money. I laughed because Carol hadn't talked to Grandpa in over a decade after some fight about holiday seating. But sure, she knew his wishes. I went to work Wednesday because bills don't pause for family drama. My manager, Connie, who'd always been fair, pulled me aside during my break. She looked uneasy. She said Mom had called that morning, saying I was having mental health issues and might need time off, suggesting an extended leave to get myself together. Connie asked if I was okay, if I needed to share anything. I told her the truth. My family was trying to cut me out of an inheritance and now wanted me fired to pressure me. Connie's face hardened. She said my job was safe, and if Mom called again, she'd deal with it. She offered the Employee Assistance Program for legal help. That's when I knew this wasn't a short fight. They'd try to dismantle my life to make me give in. Thursday, Theodore showed up at my apartment. I was getting home from work, and he was leaning against his Lexus in the parking lot, clearly waiting. He approached before I could get inside, saying we needed to talk like adults, no drama. He admitted Red Lobster was a misstep. They'd messed up, but I had to see their side. His MBA program started in 6 weeks. He'd already paid deposits. Sylvia had an offer accepted on a house. They'd made plans assuming they'd have the money. If I fought this in court, probate would stall for months, maybe a year. Theodore would lose his program. Sylvia would lose her house. I asked why that was my problem. He looked at me like I'd spoken nonsense. "Because we're family," he said. "When someone has a chance to succeed, the rest of us support it." Theodore's MBA would lead to wealth that could benefit everyone. Sylvia's house would be a family hub, a stable place for kids someday. What would I do with $100,000? Stay in retail? Buy a better car? That was just spending, not building. I asked if Grandpa thought I'd just waste money. Theodore paused. He said Grandpa was old and nostalgic, stuck on memories of me as a kid. He didn't get that some people build while others just. He didn't finish, but I knew failures. I told him I'd visited Grandpa every Sunday for 2 years. We'd watch games, go to the diner on Morrison Street, or just talk. Theodore's face changed. He said that wasn't true. Grandpa was in assisted living, barely saw anyone except holidays. I corrected him. Grandpa moved to assisted living 14 months ago. Before that, he was in his Maple Street house, where I saw him weekly. Where we'd eat dinner, and he'd tell me about growing up in the Depression or raising kids in the 60s. Where he said I reminded him of his younger self before the family decided who he should be. Theodore was speechless. This wasn't in his script. I asked when he last visited Grandpa, not a holiday call, but an actual visit. He said he'd been busy. His job demanded a lot. Grandpa understood successful people have priorities. I asked if Grandpa said that or if Theodore assumed it, because Grandpa told me plenty about people too busy for family until they wanted something. Theodore's face flushed. He accused me of guilt-tripping him, said this wasn't about who visited more or who Grandpa liked. It was about the family's future. I told him I had the real will, filed with the court, and I'd read it. There was a letter explaining Grandpa's choices, why he split everything equally among the 5 grandchildren despite some barely acknowledging him. Theodore asked what the letter said, clearly testing if I was bluffing. I told him Grandpa wrote that some measure success by wealth and status, others by showing up for people when there's nothing to gain. He hoped we'd all learn the difference, but he wasn't rewarding those who only showed up for profit. Theodore went quiet. Then he pivoted. He admitted they'd mishandled Red Lobster, been thoughtless. Couldn't we compromise? Maybe I take $50,000, let him and Sylvia have $75,000 each. Everyone wins, no one's plans collapse. I asked if he thought I'd negotiate after they threatened my job and home, after hiding Grandpa's death. He said I was holding a grudge, letting ego cloud what mattered. I told him to leave. He didn't. I pulled out my phone, opened Grace's contact info, and said he could go, or I'd call her to add harassment to our court case. He left, but not before saying this wasn't over. They'd hired a top estate lawyer, and fighting would cost me more than I'd gain. I went inside and called Grace. She'd expected this. She said Theodore was bluffing about legal costs. Estate attorneys often work on contingency for wronged beneficiaries. I wouldn't go broke fighting for what Grandpa wanted. Friday, Sylvia showed up at my work, waiting in the parking lot after my shift. She was crying before she spoke, saying her future was crumbling. The house she'd offered on, she'd told everyone, picked out furniture, chosen paint colors. Her fiancé, Atlas, had given notice at his apartment. The sellers were impatient. The financing depended on her inheritance. If this dragged out, she'd lose the house, her deposit, maybe Atlas. Did I want to ruin her life? I asked if she remembered my high school graduation party, when she told everyone I'd never amount to anything, maybe land a gas station job. She'd said it loud enough for my friends and girlfriend to hear. Sylvia said that was a decade ago. Kids say dumb things. I asked about last Thanksgiving, her toast to family who worked hard and achieved, pointedly ignoring me. She said I was too sensitive. It wasn't about me. I asked when she'd ever treated me like I mattered, asked about my life, defended me instead of joining Theodore and Dad's jabs. She said families tease. It's normal. I was blowing it out of proportion. I told her Grandpa left me the money because he knew who I was and valued me anyway. His will's letter mentioned me specifically, my weekly visits, even when my car broke down and I took the bus, how I never asked for anything but always checked if he needed help. Sylvia's tears dried up. She asked how much Grandpa wrote about me. I said over a page, single-spaced. She asked how much about her. I didn't answer. She demanded again. I told her the truth. Her name appeared once in the beneficiary list. Sylvia's face turned furious. She accused me of manipulating a lonely old man, convincing him I was some saint. I told her to leave. She didn't, yelling that I'd always been jealous of her and Theodore, that this was my sad attempt to matter. A security guard approached, and Sylvia drove off. That night, Mom texted, asking to meet for breakfast Saturday, just us, no Dad, Theodore, or Sylvia. She said we needed to talk mother to son to fix this before it worsened. I knew it was a setup, probably emotional manipulation about family loyalty, but avoiding them wasn't working. I agreed to meet at the Morrison Street Diner, where Grandpa and I used to go. 9 a.m. She said yes. I had no clue what she'd try, but I wasn't going unprepared. Grace had coached me on what to say, what to avoid, what could be used against me in court. Update 2 Saturday morning, I arrived at the diner 15 minutes early, taking the booth Grandpa and I always used, by the window overlooking the parking lot. I wanted to see Mom arrive, watch her prep herself. Call it caution, but I didn't trust anyone anymore. She pulled up at exactly 9 in her silver Buick, sitting in the car for 3 minutes, checking her makeup, taking deep breaths. She was readying for a show. Mom walked in looking drained, not just tired, but that bone-deep exhaustion from days of stress. She slid into the booth and started with how she hadn't slept, how this mess was breaking her, how she never thought our family would fight like this. The waitress came. Mom ordered coffee and toast. I got Grandpa's usual breakfast platter. Mom noticed, saying it was sweet I had good memories of this place with him, glad we'd been close. I didn't reply, waiting for her real pitch. She stirred sugar into her coffee and said Dad was unbearable lately, furious about the inheritance. Theodore was panicking over his MBA. Sylvia was a wreck about her house. The family was falling apart, and Mom was stuck trying to hold it together. She said she got why I was hurt about the funeral. Dad's call, thinking I was too unreliable, might not show up. She disagreed but went along to avoid conflict. She regretted it now. I asked if she regretted it or regretted that it gave me leverage. She looked stung, saying she'd always loved me, wanted the best for me even if I didn't see it. Dad had rigid ideas about success and what a man should be. Theodore fit that mold. I didn't. Dad couldn't handle a son who didn't meet his standards. Mom said she'd spent 30 years shielding me from his worst judgments, making excuses for why I wasn't like Theodore. It was exhausting. I asked if she was painting herself as the victim here. She said no, she was explaining the family dynamics. Dad's father was harsh, nothing was ever enough. Dad absorbed that and passed it to his kids. Theodore got praise for performing, I got criticism for not. It wasn't fair, but it was how Dad was built. I asked what this had to do with taking my inheritance. Mom winced at taking, saying that wasn't it. They thought redirecting the money was practical. Theodore and Sylvia were at pivotal moments where money would matter. I was stable, job, apartment, a life. I didn't need it like they did. I told her I earned $16 an hour, stuck there for 3 years with no raises. My apartment was a studio with broken AC my landlord ignored. My car needed a new transmission I couldn't afford. Stable? Hardly. Mom looked uneasy, saying she didn't know it was that bad, that I never said anything. I asked when I could have. At family dinners I wasn't invited to? Holidays where everyone bragged while I was the failure. When was I supposed to say I was struggling? Mom's coffee sat untouched. She admitted the family might have failed me, too focused on Theodore and Sylvia's wins to support me. But that didn't change now. Theodore's program and Sylvia's house were already in motion. If probate stalled, their futures would suffer. I asked if she'd read Grandpa's actual will, not Dad's summary. She said she'd seen parts. Dad's lawyer reviewed it. I asked if she'd read Grandpa's letter explaining his reasons. She shifted, saying the lawyer mentioned a letter but called it sentimental, not legally binding. Judges cared about law, not emotions. I opened my phone to photos of Grandpa's letter and slid it across. Read it, all of it. She hesitated, then took the phone. I watched her face change as she read. Grandpa wrote about each grandchild, Theodore's ambition that came with coldness toward those who didn't advance him, Sylvia's fixation on image and status, the other 2 grandkids he barely knew since they'd moved to Oregon. Then me, how I showed up weekly, even exhausted, helped with chores, listened to his stories, brought groceries during a snowstorm because I worried he'd run out. I reminded him of his younger self before the world reshaped him. Grandpa wrote he split the estate equally because fairness trumped efficiency, but if he could have chosen who truly got what mattered in life, it'd be me. Mom set the phone down, eyes teary. She didn't know I'd done all that for Grandpa, said it was beautiful we'd been so close. Then she pivoted. Despite that bond, despite Grandpa's words, we had to be practical. Couldn't I take $60,000 instead of $100,000? It'd change my life without ruining Theodore and Sylvia's plans. I took my phone back. I told her Grandpa's letter wasn't just sentiment. It proved he was of sound mind when he wrote the will, showing deliberate choices. It'd make their legal challenge tough. Mom's face tightened. She said I was being spiteful, not about money but punishing the family for every slight I'd felt. I said she was wrong. It was about money and respect. Grandpa valued me enough to give me an equal share, and I wasn't letting them take it because they decided I wasn't worthy. Mom said Dad was considering contesting the will, claiming Grandpa was unduly influenced, that I'd manipulated an old man. I asked if she knew what that'd involve, proving Grandpa wasn't competent, that I'd isolated him, explaining why they barely visited if he was so vulnerable. They'd have to admit they'd neglected him. Mom went quiet. Then she said Dad was relentless. He drained their savings on lawyers to make this so costly and long that I'd give up. I told her Grace had warned me about that tactic, but my legal fees were likely covered by contingency. They might bankrupt themselves, not me. Mom stood, leaving her toast untouched. She said I'd changed, no longer the sweet, laid-back son she knew. I was hard, strategic. She didn't recognize me. I said I'd been sweet and laid back for 30 years, and it got me excluded from Grandpa's funeral. This was the version of me they'd created. She left without paying for a coffee. I covered the bill. That afternoon, Dad showed up at my apartment, no warning, banging on my door at 3 p.m. I looked through the peephole, red-faced, furious. I opened the door with the chain on, asked what he wanted. He said we were ending this now. I'd sign a waiver or he'd ruin my sorry little life. I asked how. He listed it. He'd call in favors to block me from renting anywhere, spread word through his contacts that I was unstable, ensure I'd never get a better job than my current one. He had connections. He could make me jobless and homeless. I asked if he'd rehearsed that or if it came naturally. Dad slammed the door frame, told me not to be clever. Did I really think I could take on the whole family and win? A retail worker with a sob story about a dead grandpa. I said the will was filed with probate court public record, including Grandpa's letter. Anyone could read it. Theodore's MBA program, Dad's business contacts, anyone he tried to turn against me. Dad froze. He asked what I meant. I said Grace had documented everything. My visits, the Red Lobster stunt, the job threats, the 2 a.m. harassment. If he wanted a public fight, we could have one. A judge could read how my family hid Grandpa's death and tried to strong-arm me while threatening my livelihood. Dad's face turned purple. He said I was bluffing, wouldn't shame the family like that. I said they'd shamed me my whole life. I had nothing to lose. He stared through the door gap, then said I was just like Grandpa, too proud, too stubborn, headed for a lonely death in an assisted living home with nothing but memories. I said Grandpa died with at least one person who loved him, more than Dad would have if he kept this up. Dad left quietly, no slamming, no threats. That silence was worse than the yelling. Sunday, Theodore texted. His lawyer had filed to contest the will, claiming undue influence and questioning Grandpa's mental capacity. Probate was frozen until the court reviewed it. Grace called an hour later, saying the filing was weak, speculative. They had no evidence, just a hope I'd settle to avoid a long fight. She asked if I wanted to settle. I thought of Mom's weary face, Dad's threats, Theodore's arrogance, Sylvia's entitled sobs, 30 years of being the family disappointment. I told Grace no settlement. We'd fight to the end. She warned it'd get nastier. They'd paint me as a schemer who preyed on an old man, drag up every mistake I'd made. Lost jobs, failed relationships, to justify why Grandpa couldn't have wanted me to have an equal share. I said I was ready. Because here's what they didn't know. For 2 years, Grandpa recorded some of our talks. He had a little recorder on the table, said he liked replaying them to remember between visits. I had hours of those tapes. Grandpa talking about his life, his values, his frustration with his family's obsession with wealth and status, his gratitude that one grandchild knew how to just sit and listen. If Theodore's lawyer wanted to challenge Grandpa's mind, we had proof of how sharp and reflective he was until the end. Final update: the probate hearing was set 3 weeks after Theodore's filing, a preliminary session to see if his claim had enough weight for a full trial. If the judge found it weak, the will would stand, and distribution would proceed. If not, we'd be stuck in court for months or years. Those 3 weeks were rough. The family group chat, which I'd barely participated in, blew up. Sylvia posted about her stress, sleepless nights. Theodore shared an article on elder manipulation. Mom sent daily pleas for unity and forgiveness. Dad stayed silent in the chat but was clearly driving things per Mom's messages. Extended family piled in, aunts, uncles, cousins, some sympathetic, others accusing me of destroying the family. Aunt Carol texted that Grandpa was always swayed by whoever spent time with him, that I'd exploited that. I didn't reply to anyone. Grace had told me to stay silent, avoid giving them ammo. Theodore's lawyer sent discovery demands, records of my visits to Grandpa, my bank statements to prove I hadn't taken money from him, character references. They were framing me as a gold digger who'd cozied up to an old man for his will. Grace was ready. We had visitor logs from the assisted living facility, showing my weekly visits even after the will was set. We had Peter's statements confirming my 2-year relationship with Grandpa. We had receipts for groceries and prescriptions I'd bought him, unreimbursed. And we had the recordings. Grace had reviewed hours of them, picking clips showing Grandpa's clarity, his deliberate thoughts on the will, his disappointment in his family's values. The hearing day, I wore my only suit, a thrift store buy from a failed job interview. Grace met me at the courthouse, calm and professional, telling me to stay composed and trust the evidence. Theodore arrived with his lawyer, a slick guy who screamed estate law expert. Dad sat behind him. Mom was in the back, alone. Sylvia didn't come. Grace said it was deliberate to avoid looking like they were ganging up. The judge, Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s, had reviewed both filings. She asked Theodore's lawyer to make his case. He argued Grandpa was old and isolated when he changed his will, with only one grandchild regularly visiting, now set to gain significantly. The detailed letter praising that grandchild suggested manipulation. They wanted a competency evaluation based on medical records and family testimony about Grandpa's declining mind. Judge Morrison asked for evidence, medical records, doctor statements. Theodore's lawyer admitted they didn't have records yet, just family accounts of Grandpa's fading memory. The judge looked skeptical and turned to Grace. Grace presented our case. Grandpa's doctor evaluated him 6 months before his death, finding no dementia or impairment. His attorney confirmed his clarity when updating the will. His letter showed thoughtful reasoning for equal shares. On undue influence, Grace noted I was never alone with Grandpa in a coercive setting. Peter, assisted living staff, and Grace herself were frequent witnesses. My visits were documented, my relationship genuine. Then Grace played the recordings, a 15-minute compilation of Grandpa discussing his family's materialism, his belief in fairness over efficiency, his explicit wish for equal shares despite knowing some would argue otherwise. The judge listened intently. She asked Theodore's lawyer for a response. He said the recordings could be coerced or edited, needing authentication. Judge Morrison said that happened if it went to trial, but based on today's evidence, she saw no grounds for incompetence or undue influence. Grandpa was competent, worked with a lawyer, and clearly explained his choices. A closer relationship with one grandchild wasn't manipulation, it was connection. She asked for concrete evidence beyond speculation. Theodore's lawyer said they'd need time for more testimony. The judge refused to freeze the estate on guesses. She validated the will and dismissed the contest. Probate would proceed as written. The hearing lasted under an hour. Theodore stormed out, chair scraping. Dad followed, their lawyer left quietly. Grace said we'd won, the will was final, unchallenged without new evidence. I'd get my share in 3 to 4 months. I went to work that afternoon, told Connie. She gave me the day off, but I stayed, needed normalcy. Theodore texted that night, saying I'd ruined his MBA, his future, by manipulating Grandpa. I didn't reply. Sylvia texted the next day, her house deal collapsed. Atlas was questioning their engagement. I'd destroyed her life. I didn't reply. Mom called that week. Dad wasn't speaking to her because she wouldn't lie about my mental health in court. Now she was caught between us. I said I was sorry she was stuck, but Dad created this by hiding Grandpa's death and trying to take my share. These were his consequences, not mine. Mom asked if I'd share some of my inheritance now that the fight was over, to help Theodore and Sylvia show no grudges. I said no. I had plenty of grudges. The money was for leaving my studio, fixing my car, maybe school. It was for the life Grandpa wanted for me. Mom said I wasn't the son she raised who'd put family first. I said that son got treated like dirt for 30 years. This was who I was now. She hung up. 4 months later, the inheritance came. $100,000 as Grandpa intended. I deposited it, paid off debts, fixed my car, moved to a 1-bedroom with working AC and a responsive landlord. I started community college, working toward the degree I dropped a decade ago. I haven't spoken to Theodore or Sylvia since the hearing. Dad texted once, saying I'm not welcome at family events. Fine, I was barely included anyway. Mom texts on holidays, asking if I'm ready to make up. I'm not. Most extended family stopped reaching out. Aunt Carol blocked me. Some cousins side with me, some with Theodore, most avoid it. Last month, I visited Grandpa's grave, brought flowers, told him I got the money and was using it as he'd hoped, building, not just spending. I missed our Sundays. Someone else had left fresh flowers. Maybe Peter, maybe a guilty grandchild who got their share. I'm doing all right, better than all right. I'm not wealthy, but I'm stable like never before. I'm taking classes I enjoy, living somewhere that doesn't stress me out, learning that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up, who values you. Grandpa knew that. That's why he split it equally but made sure I knew he saw me. Theodore has his career. Sylvia has Atlas, though Mom says their wedding's delayed. Dad has his contacts and his grudges. Mom has her role as the family peacemaker, always at a cost. I have my inheritance, my education, my self-worth. I know which I'd pick. So yeah, I went to Red Lobster that Tuesday and they tried to cut me out, thinking I'd roll over like always. They were wrong. Sometimes the failure isn't failing. Sometimes he's just the one who knows what counts.